A quick local media mention before we launch into our next story. And following Associated Publishing's strategic decision to transform its existing publishing model to a more digital approach, the company announcing that it will not be renewing its license of the Marie Claire title. The last issue will be in December this year. Now, the challenges for women in the South African media landscape are becoming less, I understand, about numbers and more about the underlying sexism, with new threats like cyber misogyny emerging. All of this according to the third glass ceiling survey conducted by the South African National Editors Forum and Gender Links. But, say our guests, there's also a rise in women asserting themselves, spurred on by the global Me Too and local total shutdown movements. Colleen, let me start with you. Give us some context to this report. What does it set out to do?
Well, as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, this is tracking. We did a report in 2006, again in 2009, and then the SANEF approached Gender Links to say, 10, 12 years later, let's do another study to see if there's been change. There have been some quite dramatic changes beginning to even out a little bit around the numbers. So there's always been roughly equal numbers of women and men in the South African media industry overall. The issue has been, where are they in decision making? And when we started 2006, just to give you some numbers, white men constitute about 46% of those in top management. That's now about 14%. Black men were about 22%. Now that's about 50%. The real gap still is around black women in top management. So black women about 46% of the population, but about 30% of those in top management.
So, Glenda, if things are changing for the better, albeit, as Colleen points out, perhaps not quick enough, why and where is the pressure coming from?
Well, the pressure's coming from women themselves who are experiencing what we call the old boys club. By that, they mean women who were interviewed were saying, after work, this is what men do. They go out for a drink or they play golf on a Saturday and the decisions get made. So when you come back into your newsroom and you think you're one of the boys, one of the seniors, you find a decision's already been made and you haven't been part of that. So that is what undermining is, being cut off, having to experience mansplaining by men who think there's an inherent superiority to them because they're men.
Colleen, how then are women, particularly in newsrooms, dealing with and are equipped to deal with the backlash that Glenda talks about?
There's a whole bigger context, Jeremy, which is around the incredible shifts and changes that are taking place in newsrooms as a result of digitization. As you know, the media landscape is changing dramatically in the sense that there's this kind of push for survival, if I can put it that way, in many media houses. I'll tell you one change that we have noticed is that whereas 10, 12 years ago, you could actually have a conversation with newsrooms about gender and gender policies and some of the more systemic things that needed to happen. Now it's like, sorry, we don't have time for that. We're just trying to survive here. So what are women doing? I think what is new, and you mentioned it, is the sort of global Me Too, Time's Up, here in South Africa, total shutdown campaign, where women are finding their voice. The media is a microcosm of the rest of society. So, the gender violence in whatever guise or form that we see in our society, we see that in various forms within the media, particularly of obviously high levels of sexual harassment. So I think what we are seeing is women becoming more assertive, calling it out, naming it.
How is that impacting on the reportage, on the tone of what we're either seeing on television, hearing on the radio, or reading in print?
I think there's not really a difference as such, but we're seeing reflections. For instance, the Zandi trial that we're seeing, it affects women in the newsroom because they're saying, wow, a 22-year-old woman is speaking out. She didn't wait for 30 years, even though we understand why people wait for 30 years. We have compassion for that. So that affects women in the newsroom by saying, this is what's happening in the media. What's happening in the media then affects other women. And as Colleen was saying, it's a zeitgeist of the time that women are finding their voice and saying, actually, enough is enough. The problem is that, in fact, many media companies do have gender-friendly policies. The majority of people in newsrooms don't know about them. family-friendly policies do exist. One's got to fish them out from the dustbin.
And that,
of
Colleen,
the
in
newsroom.
conclusion, is one of the recommendations that you make. Better policies, but also opening up spaces for women to speak out. Yet it would seem to me that often newsrooms simply, as Glenda's suggesting, pay lip service to it, or, they've got to look somewhere for the policy.
It cuts to the heart of the nature of this industry. The news has to be produced, there's deadlines. It's that kind of a space. It's not a space that lends itself easily to stepping back in order to step forwards, which is actually what is needed here. Conversations. So, for example, a simple conversation. How many media houses have paternity leave? Most of them have maternity leave,
13%.
but only 13% have paternity leave. That's a talking point because it talks about sharing of responsibility in the home, which of course would make a huge difference for women in terms of getting senior positions in the media.
And the gender wage gap's increased. You know about that, right? 10 years ago, it was the gap was 17%, and now it's 23%. How did that happen along the way? When in fact we should have seen a decreasing of for women and men of the same
Important
experience.
issues raised, but I'm also sensing that there's still many unanswered questions. It's an important study, and to both of you, thank you very much for joining us this week. Coming up on the program, an unusual brand study just in time for Halloween, and a sensational new book unveiling the explosive debates taking place in Donald Trump's White House.